Welcome to Complex Creatures, exploring spirituality and the common good.
Joining me today on Complex Creatures is Beth Lehman. I came to meet and started to get to know you, Beth, because you were at an event we hosted at Peachtree Christian Church for the Georgia Transplant Foundation. You were here working and sharing information. And very quickly after talking with you, I realized that you and I have something in common. Like myself, you are somebody who's gone through a liver disease and transplantation surgery. And on this side of this part of your life, you become what I would consider to be an activist or a guide, a helper to people in need. So thank you for joining us. And I wanted to hear more about your story. So Beth, would you just start by telling us a little bit about how you first got into the realization that you needed some help because of liver health?
Absolutely, and I think that a lot of people out there can relate with the fact that I wasn't aware of my liver. I didn't know my liver could get sick. I don't even know that I knew what the liver did. And when I was not a very good person about going to the doctor, but I did go to my annual exams and things like that. Um, but if I'm being completely honest with you, Jared, I knew something was wrong way before it started indicating at my doctor. And that's because I drank alcohol and I drank it in excess. And I knew it was affecting my body. I could feel it. So I think that's a lot of the reason why I didn't go to the doctor because I didn't want to have to face those demons in myself. But it all kind of came to a head in December of 2019. I had started showing symptoms of liver disease. One being the most prominent is called ascites, and that's basically when your liver quits working, its main job is to dissolve of the toxins in your body. When it can't do that, those toxins fill up in the form of liquid in your abdomen, and that causes you to become bloated. It looks like a woman for she's pregnant. The man has the beer belly, as they often call it, but that really is ascites, and that's a symptom. And when people started asking me when I was due, I thought that there was some issues going on. But I really credit the doctors around me for making me get help because when I went to my doctor in December of 2019, my primary care physician basically said the gig's up. I know you're not drinking just the one glass of wine a day that you're telling me. You look horrible, so we're going to do something about it. She left the room and came back into the room and said, "You have an appointment tomorrow at the Piedmont Transplant Institute." And they've been told to tell me if you don't show. All of a sudden, that word transplant, whoa! It put me in a tailspin.
Right.
So yeah.
Well, that is a cold water splash in the face for sure. There's a couple things that you said that interest me. One, you said you weren't good about going to the doctor, nor was I, and I think so many people struggle with that, especially men. But you also said that the jig is up. The doctor told you you're not just drinking the one glass of wine per day. What do you think it is about us that is afraid to be confronted with what we sort of already know? We already know inside, you already knew something was wrong with you. If I were really honest, I think maybe I didn't know that I had liver disease, but I knew that I wasn't feeling great. I wasn't feeling my best. I knew I should go, but I didn't want to go because then I'd find out. And then there's that tendency to tell your doctor kind of fibs as if it's a test that you're going to pass, fail. Like, I'm just going to say I only drink 1 or 2 glasses of wine a week when, that's not accurate. Why do you think we do that to ourselves?
One word is stigma, and that's the whole thing around this alcohol and everything. At least for me, I didn't want to be labeled that person that couldn't control themselves, that had a problem that I couldn't fix. That was my reality of I felt I had really good control of what was going on in my life. I had a career, I had relationships, and come to find out, I didn't. And I didn't want to be faced with that. And I will say on this side of it, it's taken a lot for me to realize that that's what was going on. And I think in reality, back then, I was just scared. I didn't want, and And I grew up where alcohol is was just the be all end all of you had a problem. If you couldn't control yourself around alcohol, then that was, you were kind of labeled as I call it the man on the park bench, with the bottle and the paper bag type thing. And I didn't want people to see me that way, and I was afraid they would. Even the doctors, I was afraid. I I'm a people pleaser from inside and out, and I didn't want people to see any negativity or inability to control myself when they looked at me.
Yeah, I think I am a people pleaser too. So I often tell people, for me, that's like my attachment or need for people's approval is too high. It's just too high. And I can understand that. You don't want to be seen as the town drunk from Andy Griffith, where they draw you out in the drunk take, but everyone shakes their head at you because you just can't help yourself. You didn't want to be that person. That makes some sense to me.
You're hiding it, which is so funny because, in reality, I wasn't hiding it. It was when, I feel like when you consume too much alcohol, at least for me, I became the prettiest, the funniest, the smartest, and the biggest know-it-all person in the room. And whether I was actively drinking or not, I feel like I was constantly in a state of having alcohol in my system. So when I've gone back and talked to people to kind of face the real truth about who I was, it was no surprise to them now that I'm introducing myself as an alcoholic to them. And that was the biggest revelation to me was, oh, it wasn't so sneaky, was I? So that it was all of that kind of self-revelation. I mean, of course, you kind of know this. It's a part of the transplant process. And the reason for that is our livers are so precious. There is somebody that has said yes to organ donation that is giving that organ to us. From the doctor's point of view, they don't want to give it to somebody that they don't have the the idea that they're going to take care of it. So, I went through a lot of therapy because they said, "Oh, well, we're not sure that she's going to quit drinking. We don't want to give her that new look." So, to be honest, I welcome that now because it was a lot of self-exploration, a lot of conversations and a lot of tears. And I feel like I'm better on this end of it. And I honestly feel like I'm the best me right now that I've ever been in my life. And that's because of what happened to me.
Yeah, I am very, very pleased to hear that, and I can say the same for me. I think that there's a lot of avoidance on my end for taking care of my health because the doctor might say you have to change some things, and I had no idea just how much I needed to change or how bad things were inside of me. But it's so ironic as you live through life. I mean, I was so worried that I was going to have to be put through the difficulty and pain and struggle of changing things. But what I went through was amplified and made much more difficult. And yet on this side of it, I know that I'm better for it. And I could have done it easier.
If people look at me and go, "You're serious? Transplant made you better? Almost dying made you better?" And I was like, "Yeah, it did." And it's just a weird, weird way how life works. It's
Yeah, you're right. Let me ask this question. You said when you heard the word transplant, that for you was like it was a bad thing to hear. For me, when I heard transplant, I also thought failure. Why did you feel the way you felt about it when you heard it?
I think that I think it was a little bit of failure, now that you bring that word into play. But for me, it was a holy crap moment. I did not know I had done this much damage.
Ooh.
You grow up learning that, when I speak to kids in schools, and I'm meaning, high schoolers, 16, 17-year-olds, one of the first questions I get, is, well, duh, Ms. Lehman, your liver regenerates. Why did you get sick? And it's like it comes across as I'm 16 and I know that, but and it's true, the liver is very, very forgiving. So I thought, it was going to be a change of lifestyle. I thought I was going to be faced with stop quitting drinking. That was my biggest fear. But it turned out it was a heck of a lot more than that. And when they said that word transplant, so many things flashed before me. Fear, right? But then admittance. I was going to have to come clean on the fact that I was drinking so much more. I was drinking starting at 10 a.m. in the morning and not stopping through the day. And I was going to have to admit that. And then the fact of relationships, too. All of a sudden, I realized I was going to have to tell my husband, who was probably the one person I had ignored, treated badly, chosen alcohol over so many more times. I was going to have to ask him to help me, to be my caregiver, to do something that had driven a wedge in between us. And I didn't know how big that wedge had been. But that was the other part, was basically me just having to put all the cards on the table. And I didn't like that at all. It was me not in control, and I did not like it. And the word transplant signified all of that going on in my head, so.
Yeah, just a real wake-up call in that moment. Yeah, that's sobering. Uh, and I use that word intentionally. So talk a little bit about, before we talk about some of the spiritual feelings and implications for your life, let's talk a little bit about your process, because all of our journeys are different and unique. And so when you start the process of going through uh, being listed and trying to be readying your body and your mind and your finances or whatever it is, like I said, a lot of things, your whole life has to be accounted for to receive an organ. Talk about what that process was like for you. It was not smooth. It didn't happen all overnight, or it was, right?
It was not smooth at all. And what a lot of people don't realize is the different areas of your life that have to be analyzed before you're put to transplant. Like you said, you have to be financially worthy or have insurance that's going to do that. You have to have signed on caregivers. You have to be cleared by your dentist, because so much of what happens to us after transplant and with the medication is going to affect your body so much that you have to be the best you health wise before transplant, right? And then the other thing about that is they need to make sure that you're going to be able to withstand the surgery that could be up to 12, 13 hours, right? It's a very tricky process because you have to be sick enough to get the transplant, right? But you have to be healthy enough to be able to withstand the transplantation process, which can be brutal. And then the medications afterwards, because your body getting adapted to those medications is hard. I know I lost all my hair just from the Prograf, which is our anti-rejection medication. But so I stated earlier I had to go through some counseling, and I think once the doctors started realizing that I was serious about this, I went in for my transplant evaluation. And for anybody that doesn't know that, I say it's the 48-hour putting something in and out of every opening of your body that is there, checking every system, check it. It's your 100,000-mile tune-up. And you really, really do get worked over well. Well, I left that tune-up and I felt great. I was like, oh, the doctor said I was good. This is fantastic, that and all that. And so we went home and we were waiting for, everybody to get back to us and tell me that I was listed. And so on July 24th of 2020, we got the phone call, and I honestly thought it was my doctor going, hey, you're listed, and it was a, hey, you have cancer. And that, aside from hearing the word transplant, the word cancer just threw me into a tailspin, because that was the last thing that I thought. Talk about not knowing the damage you had done to your body. So I was diagnosed with liver cancer.
Was that so? It was liver cancer, and it was directly related to alcohol consumption.
And so, one thing is that we were so blessed, and that's a very intentional word that I use, that it was liver cancer. It could have been pancreatic cancer. It could have been kidney cancer. We were already going down that path of working on my liver. So if it was going to come, it was going to come. And so what it was hepatocellular carcinoma, which, is caused by, it can be caused by any liver disease, but it's just the general progression of your liver disease. So as cirrhosis gets worse, it's going to go into tumors and things like that. And so I already had 5 tumors.
Oh, wow.
So the best guess is that I was walking around with it for 2 years. Because liver cancer is very slow growing.
Mhm.
And then get this is what they told me, is that So I had 5 tumors, lesions, they call them the same thing. And in order for them to start the radioactive therapy that they use for this, your tumors have to be 2 centimeters, right? My largest 2 were 1.8 and 1.9 centimeters. So they said, you have cancer, go home and let it grow, and then we'll figure out what to do. So for my family, it's like I call them up and go, yeah, I have cancer. They're like, when do you start chemo? When do we do this? When do we do that? What's the action plan? And I said, no, I have to let it grow. So that started its whole journey of, um, not being listed right away, having to stop everything. I had to go through cancer treatments. And then we realized that I had varices in my esophagus that were bleeding and had to be banded, which is a very common thing for transplant people. And then, it that had to be done. And then I started my radiation treatments. I got so brittle. My bones were just so brittle because they uncovered osteoporosis, which alcohol is a very big in women, especially causes, osteoporosis. That I was I was 70 pounds December of 2020, almost a year after I was told I needed a transplant. And the act of simply vomiting from the treatments that I was getting caused my tailbone to break, and it broke into 3 pieces. And so having to get surgery on that, and what you're having to do is everything when you're kind of going into this state of having to deal with something else, is time that you are not getting on that transplant list. So I had been listed at this point in time, but what they call it is you're constantly going into status 7. And what that means is, it was explained to me like, you're on the team, you have the uniform on, but you're not in pads and you're never going to get on that field, right? So I'm still accruing time on the list, but there's no way if a liver became available, I was ever going to get it. And I ended up going into status 7 about, I think it was 6 times. So when I had to get the butt surgery, and then I had a hernia, and I think one person described it best when she said that I was constantly dealing with a little fire. So I can't tell you how long I was on the transplant list or how long we waited, because we were constantly dealing with another spinoff of what alcohol had done to my body, of what the liver disease had done to my body. I found very interesting after transplant that my husband and I were talking one night, and he said, being the caregiver of somebody with liver disease is a very isolating experience. And I asked him, I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, you preach it all the time. The liver has over 500 different functions. It has over 100 different diseases that can affect it. And he said, I simply did not know what was going to break on you next, because we were in this tailspin of things going wrong with my body that we had no clue
Yeah.
that the liver even had anything to do with. One of those being, the ammonia that develops on your brain, called AT as well, which I know you had some experience with.
Yes, I tell you, I am so sorry that you had to go through all those extra challenges. I didn't have all of those, but one thing I tell people is that your liver is a workhorse, and you just don't realize all the things that it does. So if it's compromised, as mine was, I was having I had a new relationship to my body. There was things happening that I was confused about. I'm like, oh, this has to do with my liver not working well? This is wild, maddening. You must have been really suffering emotionally during this time. It must have been so hard, because you would see some hope and light, and then it would be interrupted from another thing to put out, another fire, as you say.
Yeah.
How was that for you spiritually and emotionally?
It was constantly up and down. And my relationship with God wasn't in the best spot, because I kept getting little signs that I was not living my life right, and I was ignoring them. I was like, okay, 3 more weeks. Let me get through this stash of wine I just bought, and then I'll quit, And to me, I felt like it was direct messages that I was getting. I would, whether you want to say, seeing a commercial on TV or something like that, I felt like the universe kept telling me that I needed to stop drinking. And and I chose to ignore it. So when I when I got sick, all of a sudden, what do we as believers do is that I turned to God, and all of a sudden it was like, is he there? Have I pissed him off so much that he is just not even answering that phone call? And trying to get my Bible back out and get looking, and we kept getting this information of the little fires and all that stuff. I'm like, well, Bible reading's not working, so quit doing that, or quit, just it was just a constant relationship issue with me and God. And I wasn't vocal about it. A lot of people didn't know that I was having the issues that I was spiritually. Because I am a quiet person of faith. Um, and there are some people out there that will tell you that I'm not quiet about anything, but that part of my life, I really do. And it was, when so the night before I went into transplant surgery, I actually had been told not to come to the hospital until 6 a.m. the morning of. And I know working in this world now that I wasn't supposed to have this told to me, but I was told that my donors' families was saying their last goodbyes. So the getting the liver to me was going to be a little delayed. So not only am I sitting there, writing my own letters to my family in case I didn't come out of the surgery and all that, but all of a sudden I have this whole family I don't know that I'm praying for, that I'm saying, please, God, just give them the comfort that I am going to do something good with this liver, And so I had two sets of letter. And I think, eventually that became my first donor family letter, was the letter I had written the night before. And so I went into that surgery and, I said, I think I said something like, dear God, you know what I'm going to say. You know what's on my heart. Do your thing. And when I wake up, we'll have a chat, and it was very, I remember in my head, even when they give you that pre-operation cocktail that feels so good, before they put you under, I was going, okay, I'm good. I know this. Let me have this quick conversation. And I'll tell you what, Jared, is that when I woke up in ICU, the first word that came to my head was rebirth. And that sounds corny, even coming out of my mouth to this day, because that is not a word I would normally use in conversation. I'm not walking around going, hey, you experienced your rebirth yet? It's not something that I'm saying. And I was like, okay, he's put a challenge on me now. I've lived. We're going to do this. And that's my challenge. And so I took it that way. And that's why I live my life the way I do now. And am I perfect? No. Is my relationship with God completely reestablished? No. But it's getting there, because you said it in the very beginning of this podcast. I think everybody has something spiritual going on with them during this, because we all want to believe in that in our, to me, it's God. To other people, I'll refer to it as their higher power or their spiritual guide. But we all look at something that's going to get us through this, right? We need that as human beings. We need that, because especially going through this process, there's not a lot that you can verbalize that's going on with your body and your brain that you can tell the person sitting next to you. But yet in your head, when you're saying a prayer or whatever it is, you can get it right out there to whoever you're talking to that way. That's how I found it. So, I will say one of the biggest messages I was sent that was a repair was after transplant. And I was transplanted during COVID. My transplant was April 19th of 21. So we were in that period of where only one person could still be with you in the hospital at the time. And it was a day when my dad was with me. And I was just really struggling, and I was crying, and I was just sitting there, and my dad looks at me and he goes, what's going on? And my stomach did hurt, and I did have really bad post-operative gas, but it wasn't that making me cry. It was something emotionally going on.
Sure.
So And I said, Dad, I said, I can't get over thinking about that family. And I said, the person, I said, they're probably at a funeral right now. I was envisioning what this family I didn't know was doing. And he looked at me and he said, you've got to get over this.
Mm.
He said, you didn't do anything. This is your life now. And I looked at him, I was like, no, I can't. So then I talked to my mom a little bit about it. And so we have this friend of our families, and I kind of call her the crazy Christian. And she is a dear friend. I'm from Columbus, Georgia, and so my parents are still there, and she's down there. And she will give out the little copies of the New Testament to people sitting in the hospitals that she can see are upset, either waiting on a family member or something like that. And she told my mother, she said, now I want you to tell Beth this. And she gave me some supporting Bible verses to read, that when you're created, God knows how many days you're going to live. He knows what you're going to do. He has that plan made out for you. My donor's days had come up in God's mind. I didn't do anything to cause his death. It was something that was pre-established. And in my world, my days weren't up for God yet. So that when she told me that message through my mom, that reinforced the idea of I survived for a living. Because, we had gotten to the point where, the day I got the phone call, I got the phone call for my liver 2 hours after we had planned my funeral, because that was the direction that the doctors had told us this was going in.
Yeah.
So, I was there. And when I finally got that message from Donna, her name is Donna, it turned everything around. And from then I started living as if I'm on a mission, I've heard it explained before. It was probably back in vacation Bible school that, you come to God with your big chain around your neck, and how many links has he taken off for your bad behavior? And you don't want to go up in front of God with your chain being only 3 links left going, can I get into heaven? I think that's how they explained it to us as children. But, in my head, I'm like, okay, now I've got a full chain now. I don't have any links gone. Let me see what I can to never get a link removed when I go to meet my maker. That was that actually went through my head. And so, that one message from her
Wow.
changed everything post-transplant for me.
And you are a person of great energy, and you worked with Sober Livers and American Liver Foundation, and you've done so much, and you're always spreading the word, and I appreciate that. And there's this sense after receiving a gift like that, a sense of, it might be born of some guilt sometimes, but it might be born of gratitude, and it might be just missional living that comes over us. I too, when I received my new liver, I too suffered some survivor's guilt. I remember walking around Chastain Park in North Atlanta, uh, and I decided that when I found out I had liver disease and got really, really, really sick, I was out of work for about 6 months, just trying to survive and recover. And during that time, I went radio silent with people because I was just trying to survive. So I didn't stay to the world on social media or call lots of people and give them updates. I was just trying to do the bare minimum to make sure that the focus was on getting healthy. And so now I had the surgery. This is sometime later. And I thought, I'm going to keep, as I'm recovering for surgery, I'm going to keep people updated more. They've been following with me, and I'll just make videos and things. So on this walk around Chastain, I find myself apart on the walkway, and I take a breather, do a little video talking about how I'm feeling and what's going on. And I reference the person, the donor whose liver I received, and I don't know anything about them, but I talked about how they died and I get to live, and my voice cracked. I got emotional. I didn't realize that was going to happen, and then I kind of cut the video short. I found a way to end it, and it ended it. And a man named Jim Street, who is he's a retired minister and a professor. I knew him through some relationships. He had a heart transplant several years before. He saw it on social media. He reached out to me and he said, "Let me help you." He said, "I'm seeing a little bit of guilt here. And let me just tell you," he goes, "it is not the case that your donor chose to die so that you could live. It's just the case that they died. And it's also the case that they decided and their family decided that they're going to make use of their organs. And it's the case that you were ready for it. And it's the case that you received it. And yes, you get to live. But you didn't cause their death. You're not responsible for the death. And the only thing you have to ask yourself to do is what will you do with the gift? And at the same time, I was working through things at therapy because, when you come this close to death, that's a lot to unpack. So I'm seeing a therapist and he said something very similar. He said, Jared, here's a thought. And this is a thought that still guides me. He says, what do you do in a relay race when someone hands you the baton? I go, well, you take it and then you run. And he goes, here's the thing. Your donor handed you the baton. Now, they may not have chosen to hand it to you, but they handed it to you. So what are you going to do with it? And I'm like, by God, that is a way for me to think. I didn't steal it away. They didn't. It just happened to come to me now. But the question really is, what will I do with it? You know?
I like that. And then I like what the gentleman that received the heart transplant told you is that he didn't choose to die and then that, he didn't die to give you that organ. He just died. And it was what happened after that he chose, his family chose, that kind of a thing. And I think that that's as many times as transplant recipients, we categorize it in our heads as that they died to give us the liver. And you're right. They died. They didn't die, in order for this process to kick off for me. I'm not that important, trust me. I know that much. And so, but no, I really do think that, and that is what people don't realize with transplant. And let's back up here. That part of the whole process isn't just liver. I mean, liver disease puts us in a strange state of mind anyway. But, I've talked to people that have received kidney transplants and heart transplants and all that. And that survivor's guilt is real. And it's just, I had gone through this entire process because I'm 4'11". Thanks to liver disease, I was 5 foot, but I've shrunk a little bit. And so, I'm not a big person. So they had prepared me all along that I potentially could receive a child's liver. And so I had been processing that in my head. So I couldn't help but think, gosh, this family saying goodbye to a child and all that. And you're right. We don't know anything about our donors or anything like that.
Oh, yeah.
But through the work that I'm doing, and just through some information that was passed along to me, I did find out that my donor was from North Carolina. And then I was able to find out that he was a 43-year-old male. Well, that took the survivor's guilt and flipped it all around because now he may have had children, and everything. And I'll never forget, we came home from the hospital. Everything, my mom was there, my dad was there, my husband was there, and I sat down and I think everybody had left and I started watching a movie and I started bawling crying. And I mean, we're talking the nasty cry, the big, I'm crying. And so my husband heard me,
Right.
and he comes and he goes, "What's wrong?" And I said, "My donor will never sit on the couch and watch a movie again." And he said, and it was almost like everything I did, I was like, my donor can't do anymore. And I said, and he probably had kids and he did, and my husband said, stop. You can't fantasize and create a life for him. You can't, you don't know anything about him and all that. So, that was another part of things that I had to go through and cope with. And, and I think with people with alcohol related liver disease, you throw in that other complicated component of trying to stay sober after you have struggled with staying sober for so long. And it's, some people are more sober than others. I know that sounds kind of funny to say, but you have less time accrued and everything. And for me, I think back, and if I was newly sober, trying to cope with the day-to-day, cravings, or what are you thinking? And I had a very good recovery. I have not had any cravings, any urges or anything like that. But But if you are newly sober and you're trying to go through all this mental stuff that we're talking about right now after transplant, and you're still trying to stay sober from your disease as well, I mean, that's a lot to put on people. And, the new trend now in the whole business of transplant is making sure that patients have the mental providers available to them after transplant.
Yeah,
Because a lot of the doctors, it's all medical right now. They just kind of cut you off and you're on your own unless you have a problem. But now it's really trying to move to that direction.
it is heavy. It is a heavy road to walk. And there's a chaplain in our congregation. She's palliative care, and she's the one who looks to me sometimes and says, you are forever a transplant patient. Like, that complicates everything. And a lot of people just see you going your normal business, but it is true. Things are just different, and it's a lot to deal with afterwards. And so having another thing to cope with, if you have an addiction to something like alcohol, it does complicate it. And I will say that I saw an article in the New Yorker where there was a lot referencing a lot of people who had received transplants and then went back to drinking. Getting a new liver does not solve the disease of alcoholism if you happen to have alcoholism. And all of this reflection out loud makes me want to ask you about the work that you do. You do a lot of advocacy and raising awareness and trying to help people in need. And so that puts you in conversation with people. And you've told me in other occasions that there's been times when people have told you that they didn't think you deserved a transplant because it was alcohol-related liver disease. I want to talk about that with you because if you tell someone I had liver disease, they automatically, immediately assume it's alcohol anyway, when it could be other things. But you're right. If there is anything to do with alcohol, people will say, well, you did it to yourself. Do you really deserve to receive a liver? What's that like to hear something like that? Do you understand it? Does it hurt you?
I do understand it, but I didn't at first. It was when I first was kind of telling the people close in my inner circle I needed a transplant. I had one fairly good friend that told me, "Wow, I don't know if they should give you a liver or not." And she was kind of trying to say it in jest and all that because, talking about how she's like, "You always have a glass of wine in your hand," and so that first little taste of it started right then. And then, like I said, I grew up in a family where alcohol just wasn't a thing. And you had some long lost uncles that were alcoholics, right? But it wasn't in your immediate circle of the family, so it didn't exist. And when I had to call my parents and tell them that I not only had liver disease and needed a transplant, but that it was from alcohol, that is like the worst day of my life. Having to tell them, that the straight A student, that kind of a thing, has screwed up. And so it you always have this label. So when I always kind of relate it to my cat, and this I'm going somewhere with this, trust me. But when I went to the vet with my cat, and they had his file all the time, and huge black Sharpie letters at the top of it said, "Will bite." And I'm like, oh yeah, they're making sure that they know he'll bite, right? Well, I felt like every time any doctor or any nurse was looking at my file on the computer, there was a huge big red banner on the top that said alcoholic.
Ooh.
That's how I felt. And the medical community, they do a great job. They don't judge, they don't anything, but they have to address this issue, and you reference people that do not drink that have liver disease, they have to ask them the questions too, and it's hard. And so, I had this stigma in my family. When I started talking publicly, I didn't know it was going to be outside of my world too. I did have the wherewithal to not talk about my journey after transplant because it was just still too much. Because actually, during my transplant evaluation, they found tuberculosis.
Oh, wow.
And so after transplant, I had to go through a 9-month tuberculosis treatment that ended up giving me drug-induced lupus. So I had issues after transplant too. So I discussed it with my family and my friends and everything. And I was like, y'all, too much has happened to me. The doctors are telling me that I'm like, the cancer, cirrhosis, transplant, the trifecta, the triple crown, all this, that I need to tell people about my story. And I said, and I'm starting to feel that way too. And my parents were like, fine, it's your story to tell and all that. So on my 1 year anniversary, I went public and I used Facebook to go public. I
Mm.
too went offline. I was not doing anything online. I wasn't talking to anybody. And we were lucky enough to it was COVID. So we didn't really have to tell people how ill I really was.
Right.
Nobody was coming to see me anyway. And so I posted on Facebook and it said, hey, y'all, haven't been around in a while. I've had a liver transplant. The second statement there was, yes, I'm an alcoholic. And I did that purposely because I didn't want the whispering to happen. I didn't drink in high school. I'm still friends with people in my hometown. I was in church. I was with the young lifers and all that. And so I had to put it out there. And still, even after we had discussions, my parents got very upset
Mm.
because they just, and I think somehow they thought me labeling myself as an alcoholic labeled them as failures as parents.
Right.
And it did not. It did not at all. So we had to do a lot of repair in our relationship there. But yes, every time I speak, every time I tell my story, and I'm when I went public, I said nothing's off the table. It is, I'm gonna air everything. When somebody asks me a question, I'm gonna answer it. So it comes up often when people ask me, and I'm honest that yeah, my consumption rate was 3 to 4, 4 to 5 bottles of wine a day. And it's almost like when I say that, sometimes I can see who in the audience has turned their head, their listening ears off, right? Judgment right there. And usually somebody comes up to me and tells me, some do it nicer than others, but some say, I respect your journey and all that, but I don't think you ever should have received your liquor. You did this to yourself. There's too many people out there on the waiting list that have real diseases. They say the real disease that should have received your liver. And, it really upset me at first. And, my response is something like, I'm sorry you feel that way, but I hope that what I'm doing now shows you that I'm being real with this. And then I had to stop and think about it from their perspective. What if they had an abusive relationship with somebody that was an alcoholic in their family? What if the father was an alcoholic, and had issues? And what if that's the thing. The other side of what happens when I speak is that somebody comes up to me. Everybody knows a mother, a father, a sister, a friend, who they're concerned about, who drinks too much. It's out there, and so that it. I had to say that there's something in those people's minds that's making them say that about me, and I get into the whole let me show you kind of mind frame. I'll show you what I'm going to do. And I will tell you, Jared, that's one of the biggest things I'm scared about because I have written letters to my donor family. And of course, you can't say anything. They wouldn't have known from a letter from me that I was an alcoholic or anything like that. But if I do get to meet them, will they be disappointed that their loved one's liver went to an alcoholic? And that is why I think part of me is content with just knowing it was a 43-year-old man from North Carolina, and I pay honor that way. It's and people have often said, well, why can't we decrease alcohol use like we did cigarettes? Not too long ago, everybody that had received a lung transplant was labeled the smoker. Oh, how many packs a day for you? That kind of a thing. And that's getting better now. And people say, why can't we do that with alcohol? And it's because alcohol is celebratory. It's everywhere in our society. I think we pretty much all know that a cigarette is not good for you, right? But a glass of wine is not bad for you, right? If you have your moderation and you can drink it, drink it. I preach abstinence. I wish I could have a glass of wine with my girlfriends, but I can't stop at one.
I think right now there's more negative about alcohol than I've ever seen in my life and the media. However, you're right. It's as ancient as civilization. And I have to reflect though about people's response to you, as understandable as it is. it is as much empathy as you've shown by trying to think about it from their perspective, which is very, very wise of you. It does still illustrate that we have a dichotomous view of illness and health in our society. We tend to think of health and mental health as two separate related categories. And we still, even though we might say addiction and chemical dependency is a disease, that we say that more than I think we fully believe it as a society. And I think it's still very important to keep raising the awareness to people that mental health is just healthcare. Mental health stuff is just about health in general. And alcohol dependency is a disease. Some people have that disease, some don't. And the more that we destigmatize it, I think the better we're going to be as a society. I find so much value in what you do. I don't know if you participate in the 12-step program, but what I find valuable about it spiritually is that people usually engage in those activities without judgment and they're honest. And if we could just engage ourselves with more honesty and without judgment of one another, I think we would be healthier spiritually and socially.
But what you just said and how I flipped my brain, to think about it from the other person's perspective was something I learned through the 12-step program.
Okay.
Was think about it from that other person's point of view. I no longer participate, but I started a 12-step program when I was a year and a half sober. So it was, because I got sober and I went through all my illness. So it was just not something for me, but I did do the 12 steps to make sure that I can mentor people that are going through that process right now. But that flipping of my brain was something that I took away from that.
Wonderful.
And you're right. However, I will tell you that one thing about a lot of your 12-step programs is that there's not a space for somebody in our situations that have harmed our bodies. You're talking with people with addiction and all that, and we all fit into that room. But then there's a separate side room over there going, hey, wait, we're over here. We have to take medicine. We messed up our bodies. We look at ourselves in the mirror and we have a huge scar. And that's part of why Sober Livers was started with it, which is the first ever national organization for support for people with alcohol related liver disease, both pre and post transplant. But I want to say that, I have seen people that get upset with the 12-step programs because there's no one like them that's sick there, right? I encourage those people, anybody that can hear this, is take the sickness away from yourself for a minute and listen to what they're saying and get it that way. And let's, try to get your illness related issues going on, let's compartmentalize our issues here. This one has to do without transplant. This one has to do with transplant. We can't do that, but it's a different level of support that's needed for someone with liver disease and alcohol dependency than not. And I think we pretty much could say that, but we as the ones with the disease have to do what we need to do for ourselves as well. And something that I just now started to even broach was what a lot of people don't know was that after I quit drinking, had my transplant and everything, I started shopping and it got very, very out of control. And the same practices that I'm doing with drinking. And if it's gambling, if it's food, if it's anything, I'm sick. I have a mental illness. I have to know the triggers and know how to identify that within myself. And I agree with you. Therapy is good. I grew up in a family that kind of poo-pooed it, but now it's, it's needed, and mental health has to be addressed. And I think we're getting closer, with some of the people putting it out there a little bit more, but it is still not where it needs to be.
Well, Beth, with our last few minutes, you're talking about Sober Livers. Let's talk about the advocacy work, the awareness work you're speaking. Let's talk about things that you're doing, because I really respect this a ton about you, that you're taking something that was a challenge to you, something that risked your life, something that changed your life, and you're using it and you're turning it around and using it for good, to help others, which is admirable and very necessary. Tell us about your work. What things are you up to? Where can people see some stuff that you're about? And maybe in addition to that, where are some places, if people are more curious do you have any resources that you could send them to go take a look and find out more?
Absolutely. I do a lot of work with the American Liver Foundation. I, like many people that I have talked to, didn't really realize there was a liver foundation out there. And they are going through, they're getting bigger. They're going through a growth process, and they had a little bit of a lapse, where some information wasn't getting dispersed as much. But the American Liver Foundation, and actually, we are holding the Liver Life Walk Atlanta on April 12th, which is a month from yesterday. And it's going to be at Brook Run Park in Dunwoody. And that is like everything you need to know about liver awareness. I'll be there. I'm the chair of the walk. And we're going to have some executives from the American Liver Foundation there. And all of your hospitals will be participating. So, that's a fun way to come out and learn more about liver disease and what you can do for it. But the one thing that I always tell, I have a lot of mentees that I'm mentoring through this process now. Please, please, please try to make sure you're getting your information off the internet from a reputable source. And I tell people, go to the American Liver Foundation, go to the Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, WebMD. After that, don't. I had a firm rule with myself that I stood by, was that I was never going to look at anything with liver disease more than 2 clicks in. Because you get down those rabbit holes, and all of a sudden you have liver disease because there has been a mouse in your house somewhere. All of these funny little things start coming up and going, oh, so and so said this, and it's not true at all.
Or how milk can cure your cirrhosis.
Exactly. Yes, yes, yes. Some of the Facebook groups are okay. Some have misinformation. For people with alcohol-related liver disease, of course, Sober Livers is a resource, soberlivers.org. And, make sure you're going to a reputable resource. And then the other thing, the biggest thing that I hear is that, oh, I'm going to bother the doctors with all my questions. No, as a matter of fact, everybody out there, if you're going through liver disease or any disease, go get a notebook. Go start writing down everything. Write down all of your visits. Write down all of your questions. In between your visits, write down your questions. I've talked to the doctors. They want you to do this. And the other thing that I try and tell people is find your communication method with your medical professionals. And what I mean by that is I'm married to a lawyer. I don't speak lawyer. When he comes home, I ask him to speak in words under 3 syllables. If you need to do that for your medical professionals, do it. If you need them to draw pictures to explain things, do it. Find out how you can get what they are telling you absorbed in yourself the most and use it and tell them that. You're only going to get 10, 15 minutes with your doctors. More, or do an email these days, but write down your questions and they are happy to answer them. I had a whole book, and it's so funny because my doctors, by the end of my illness, they would just take the book out of my hand. So how you doing? Oh, she wants to know about this. Okay. And they would just write down the answers in my book. They knew I was going to come with my questions. And I credit me being able to be a good mentor towards my mentees now because I have asked the questions. And I have, tried to make myself knowledgeable. And the other part is I've tried to make myself knowledgeable about the other liver diseases that are out there, because there's over 100 of them.
Right.
Because once you're diagnosed with liver disease, regardless of how you got there, you're going to go through the same path of the illness, right? And you have the same symptoms and you have the same things going on.
Yes.
We're all more alike than they want to admit.
Well, I want to tell you thank you for your work and your encouragement. When I met you that day, I felt the force of energy that you are and the community. I could hear it right away from your storytelling. And I consider it a real providential moment to meet you, because I don't know very many people who've gone through transplants, let alone liver transplants. And I know there's plenty, but in my journey, I did feel rather isolated. I felt every time I would tell somebody, "Oh, I think I have to have a transplant," their first response was, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And that was after they knew I'd already been suffering. And so no, I had to tell them, "Oh, no, this is a good thing. I'm going to survive and I'm going to be able to live well." And it just pointed out in my mind that these people just don't know folks who've had a transplant. So they're just unaware of this, of the life-saving and beneficial offering that it is. And so anyway, it was by meeting you and hearing your story, I was encouraged, and not just to continue walking, but encouraged to try to turn around and help the next person up. So thank you for what you do.
Yeah, that's what we have to do. We have to pay it forward because, if having knowledgeable patients leads to good outcomes, and it creates more of you and me and that out there in the world that can work to help to bring, bring light to this crazy world we live in.
Beth, thank you so very much. And
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
look forward to seeing you again.
Yep. You take care.